The experience of a child who grows up feeling overlooked often shapes an adult who finds it difficult to believe they are worthy of attention. These individuals may enter a room and instinctively try to make themselves smaller. In relationships, they question if their presence is too demanding. Even when they achieve success, instead of feeling proud, they brace themselves for it to go unnoticed, as if being invisible is their default state. This isn't because they lack ability or value. It stems from a sense of self that was formed in an atmosphere of quiet disregard. In psychology, this is known as an internalized neglect schema. Over time, the mind learns to anticipate being overlooked. It expects dismissal and begins to treat personal needs as an inconvenience. A child who is repeatedly ignored eventually stops asking for anything. They come to believe that desiring love, affection, or understanding is somehow inappropriate. Picture a child in a busy room, gently pulling on a parent's sleeve, hoping for just a brief moment of eye contact or a word of recognition. You might have observed this on a playground, in a school, or even within your own home. It's the child who doesn't make the loudest noise or demand the most attention, but instead withdraws into stillness. On the surface, it may not appear significant. Internally, however, something deeply important is occurring. For a child, being ignored is more than a minor setback. It feels like a fundamental crack in their developing sense of identity. The difficult reality is that childhood neglect, whether deliberate or not, doesn't always resemble overt mistreatment. It isn't always about cruelty. Often, it is simply an absence. It can be the questions left unanswered, the lack of engaged attention, the forgotten celebrations, or the parent who is too preoccupied, exhausted, or distracted to notice. The psychological impact on an ignored child is profound and lasting. It influences their self-perception, their worldview, and how they form relationships many years later. There's a common assumption that children are highly resilient, that they can recover from almost anything. While children do adapt, adaptation is not the same as healing. When a child learns to exist without acknowledgement, they adapt by making themselves smaller. They conceal their needs and persuade themselves that they are less important than others. This strategy might help them navigate their childhood, but it can subtly follow them into their adult life in ways they might not fully understand. From a psychological standpoint, acknowledgement is not merely about feeling good. It is a necessity for healthy development. Studies in child psychology consistently highlight that children require three fundamental elements to flourish: safety, stimulation, and connection. If any one of these is missing, their growth is impacted. Connection, the experience of being seen, heard, and valued, is the element that most directly shapes a child's sense of identity. The founder of attachment theory emphasized that secure attachment, formed when a caregiver reliably acknowledges and responds to a child's needs, establishes a foundation of trust. This trust then becomes the model for all future relationships. However, if a child is ignored, if their needs are met with silence or unpredictability, they don't just feel momentary disappointment. They absorb a damaging belief. Perhaps they are not deserving of love. Perhaps they are not important. This is not an overstatement. Neuroscience research reveals that when a child's attempts to connect are consistently overlooked, their brain interprets this as a threat. The body's stress response activates, releasing cortisol. Over time, this can rewire their nervous system to anticipate rejection. Their baseline emotional state becomes anxiety. Their ability to manage emotions becomes unstable. Yet from the outside, they might simply appear to be a quiet child. When a child is actively mistreated, the harm is evident. When a child is ignored, the damage is less visible, more subtle but equally real. A child might cease asking questions because they don't expect an answer. They might stop expressing excitement because no one responds. Gradually, they begin to fade, not in a physical sense, but emotionally. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as emotional neglect. Unlike physical neglect, which leaves visible marks, emotional neglect leaves scars hidden below the surface. These scars often don't fully emerge until adulthood, when the individual tries to build close relationships, pursue ambitions, or find purpose, and collides with the unaddressed wounds from their past. For instance, many adults who felt ignored as children report challenges with low self-esteem. They are hesitant to share their thoughts, convinced that no one is genuinely interested. They might fear rejection so intensely that they avoid relationships completely. Alternatively, they might relentlessly seek approval, going to great lengths to please others because, deep down, they are still trying to earn the acknowledgement they missed in childhood. Imagine being 8 years old, coming home from school excited about a drawing you made. You hold it up to show a parent, but they are occupied on a call. You try again during a meal, but the conversation moves past you. Eventually, you put the drawing away and never bring it up again. Now, imagine this scenario repeating dozens, even hundreds of times throughout your childhood. The child learns that feelings of excitement, pride, and even joy are best kept private. Years later, that same person, now an adult, might struggle to celebrate their own accomplishments, dismissing them as insignificant. The ignored child grows into the adult who ignores themselves. Research supports this. A study published in the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry found that emotional neglect in childhood is strongly linked to persistent feelings of loneliness in adulthood, regardless of the person's social environment. This means that even if an adult has friends, family, or a partner, a quiet sense of emptiness often remains inside. Most parents who overlook their children are not acting out of malice. Frequently, it results from stress, financial pressures, mental health challenges, or simply not realizing how vital acknowledgement is. A parent working multiple jobs may have little emotional energy remaining. A parent coping with depression may find it hard to notice their child's requests for attention. In the modern era, digital distractions, phones, screens, and constant notifications can pull focus away from family interactions. However, the intention behind the absence does not change its impact on the child. The feeling of being overlooked is the same, no matter the reason. This is why understanding the psychology of the ignored child is so crucial. Awareness is the initial step toward breaking the cycle. Ignored children often develop coping strategies that can, at first, appear to be strengths. Some become intensely self-reliant, learning to look after themselves from an early age. Others become high achievers, striving to finally obtain the recognition they long for. Some become peacemakers, avoiding conflict at all costs to preserve a fragile sense of connection. But underneath these strengths often lies exhaustion. The independent child matures into an adult who finds it hard to trust others. The high achiever becomes the perfectionist, never feeling satisfied. The peacemaker becomes the people pleaser, unable to establish boundaries. Perhaps the most heartbreaking adaptation is the child who gives up entirely. The one who decides if no one cares, why make an effort? This child often carries a sense of apathy into adulthood, struggling with motivation, ambition, and hope. Ignored children seldom talk about their experiences because how do you describe what it feels like to be invisible? There is no dramatic event to recount, no specific incident to point to, no visible scars to show, just silence. Just the memory of moments that should have been meaningful but were not. That silence can become a barrier in itself. Adults who grew up ignored often hesitate to seek support, worried they will be dismissed again. People in therapy sometimes downplay their experiences, saying that nothing truly bad happened to them. But the absence of something essential is itself a form of trauma. It is like growing up in a house with no air. Just because you survive does not mean you are breathing freely. The long-term consequences are real and measurable. Research from the National Institute of Mental Health indicates that adults who experienced emotional neglect as children face a higher risk of anxiety, depression, and difficulties in forming close relationships. Another study from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child notes that consistent acknowledgement in childhood strengthens neural pathways associated with resilience, while neglect weakens them. Simply put, acknowledgement is not a luxury. It is a developmental requirement. This does not mean every ignored child is destined for hardship. Many grow into empathetic, reflective adults precisely because they understand what it feels like to be unseen. However, it does mean their path is often more challenging. It means they must spend years unlearning beliefs that were embedded in them before they had the capacity to question those beliefs. So, where does healing start? Not with achieving perfection, not with instantly becoming self-assured, but with recognition. With the simple yet powerful act of telling yourself that what you experienced was significant. Your needs were real. Your pain is valid. For the ignored child who has become an adult, the first step is often about giving themselves the acknowledgement they did not receive. While this might sound abstract, it can be surprisingly practical. It can be as small as taking a moment to celebrate your own achievements, as simple as speaking your feelings aloud, even if only to yourself, as basic as daring to believe that your thoughts and feelings are important. Because the truth is, the need for acknowledgement does not disappear with age. It simply goes underground. The journey of healing is about bringing that need back into the light. Consider how this manifests in friendships. An ignored child often becomes the quiet friend who listens intently, but finds it hard to share their own difficulties. They may be the person who is always there for others, but rarely asks for support in return. To the outside world, they may appear selfless, but inside, there is often a persistent ache, a question of why they don't matter as much as others. This is not a sign of selfishness. It is a longing for a balance they never experienced. In romantic relationships, the patterns can be even more pronounced. Some adults who were ignored as children become intensely eager for affection, holding tightly to anyone who shows them attention. Others move in the opposite direction, maintaining emotional distance because intimacy feels risky. Both reactions stem from the same root: the fear that love will vanish, the expectation that their needs will not be met. Yet here lies a paradox. The ignored child often grows into one of the most compassionate adults you will ever encounter because they know the pain of being unseen. They develop a heightened sensitivity to the emotions of others. Research in developmental psychology has shown that neglected children frequently develop strong observational skills. They learn to read facial expressions, tones of voice, and subtle changes in mood because their well-being depended on it. They had to gauge when it was safe to speak and when silence was the only option. This heightened awareness can become an asset in adulthood. However, it also carries a significant cost. They may become attuned to everyone else while losing touch with themselves. There is another aspect to this that is seldom discussed. When a child is ignored, their sense of identity can remain unclear. They were not mirrored adequately, meaning their emotions and thoughts were not acknowledged enough for them to feel real in the eyes of others. As adults, they might constantly seek validation, not because they are superficial, but because they never had the opportunity to fully see themselves reflected in another's care. Identity develops through connection. Without that reflection, a sense of self remains fragile. But here is where something remarkable occurs. The human mind possesses a resilience that is almost poetic. Even when a child grows up feeling ignored, they still hold onto a quiet hope. This is why so many ignored children as adults actively seek healing. They read psychology books. They explore self-discovery. They attend therapy or write in journals. They are not willing to accept the silence they were raised in. They want to break it. That desire alone is evidence of strength, and healing is possible. Neuroscience has shown that the brain is not fixed. It adapts, changes, and rewires. This means that even if a child grew up ignored, as an adult they can establish new patterns. Every time they express themselves and are heard, the brain registers safety. Every time they set a boundary and it is respected, the nervous system learns trust. Each moment of healthy connection acts like a drop of water, gradually wearing away the stone of old wounds. Healing does not always appear dramatic. Sometimes it looks like finally telling a friend that you need them to listen. Sometimes it is daring to say that you feel hurt instead of internalizing the pain. Sometimes it is sitting alone and affirming to yourself that your feelings matter, even if no one ever taught you that. These small moments are actually revolutions because they push back against years of silence. The truth is, none of this is easy. Ignored children often become adults who fear rejection more than anything else. So speaking up can feel terrifying. Setting boundaries can feel like a betrayal. Asking for help can feel like a sign of weakness. But the courage to do these things in spite of the fear is what slowly rebuilds the sense of self. It is also important to acknowledge that parents who ignore their children are not always cruel. Sometimes they were ignored themselves. Sometimes they were overwhelmed, consumed by their own struggles, or simply unaware of the impact of their absence. This does not excuse the hurt, but it reminds us that cycles of neglect often extend back through generations. When an adult begins to heal from being ignored, they are not only healing themselves, they are breaking a chain that may have lasted for decades. Think of it this way: every ignored child who learns to listen to themselves becomes a parent, a friend, or a partner who listens more attentively. Every ignored child who learns to value their own needs becomes someone who teaches others that their needs matter too. Healing creates a ripple effect. This leads to one of the most vital truths. An ignored child often feels as though their existence made no impact. But in reality, their story holds immense power. Their journey from invisibility to reclaiming their presence can inspire others in ways they may never realize. By sharing their truth, they remind others who have lived in silence that they are not alone. By daring to heal, they open a door for others to heal as well. So if you were that child, if you ever sat in your room waiting for someone to notice you, if you ever felt your emotions were too heavy for anyone to carry, if you ever questioned whether your presence mattered, hear this now. It mattered then and it matters now. You matter now. Healing is not about erasing the past. It is about giving yourself the love you always deserved. It is about learning to see yourself not through the lens of neglect, but through the lens of compassion. It is about realizing that being ignored shaped you, but it does not define you. The psychology of the ignored child is a story of pain, yes, but also of extraordinary resilience. It is the story of how silence can create wounds, but also how breaking that silence can create wisdom. It is the story of how invisibility can feel like a burden, but can also fuel a deeper empathy, a stronger drive to connect, and a profound hunger for truth. In the end, the child who was ignored often becomes the adult who refuses to ignore others. And in that choice, imperfect, complicated, and brave, they discover something profound. They were never truly invisible. They were simply waiting to be seen. If this resonated with you, consider subscribing for more insights. Liking and sharing this video helps others discover this important conversation.